Okay, let's dive in. There was this really brief but incredibly intense time in history, wasn't there? The whole world suddenly looking up.
Absolutely. Not just looking, but aiming for the stars, literally. Early 60s, deep in the Cold War.
And the race wasn't just on Earth anymore, it was the space race.
Exactly. And right then, May 61, President Kennedy makes this just audacious speech
The commitment to land a man on the moon.
and bring him back safely before the end of the decade. He called it the greatest technological undertaking. Project Apollo was born.
But it was driven by urgency, right? Because just a month before Kennedy's speech.
Yuri Gagarin, April 61, the Soviets put the first human in orbit.
And the sources we looked at say that really put the Americans, culturally anyway, into a bit of a panic.
It certainly did. And that panic, that feeling of being behind, well, that provided the political fuel Apollo needed. It wasn't just about exploring space.
No, it was about showing technological dominance,
Yeah.
superpower stuff.
Definitely. And NASA pulled together this colossal team. Eventually, something like 400,000 scientists, engineers, technicians.
400,000 people. Just try to wrap your head around that scale. The
Well-
energy, the sheer optimism you read about. It felt like anything was achievable.
And they did it. July 1969, Apollo 11.
Neil Armstrong on the moon. Broadcast everywhere. A fifth of the planet watched. America regained its prestige.
A huge, undeniable triumph. But here's the twist, and it's kind of a sad one for science.
The momentum didn't last.
Not really. Public interest, political will, it started to wane surprisingly fast by 1972, just 3 years after the moon landing.
NASA had to cancel the last 3 missions. Apollo 18, 19, and 20. Gone.
Which meant Apollo 17 suddenly became the final trip. And the courses call that a tremendous loss from a scientific viewpoint.
Yeah, imagine what we could have learned if those missions had flown. Our understanding of the moon, the early solar system, it would be so much deeper.
So the obvious question is, okay, if Apollo 17 were the last one, what was it like? Was it just, winding down?
Not even close. And that's really what we want to get into today. Apollo 17 is often called the hidden jewel of the program.
Hidden jewel, why's that?
Well, it didn't get the massive headlines of Apollo 11, or maybe the drama of 13, but it smashed records, did incredible science.
Ah, so it was actually a high point in many ways.
Exactly, a kind of crowning glory, scientifically speaking. So our mission here is to unpack that story, the crew, the challenges, the discoveries of that final remarkable voyage, using the materials we have.
Right. Who were these last men on the moon, and what did they actually find?
Okay, the crew. 3 guys. Commander Eugene Cernan, a very experienced Navy pilot, already a space vet.
He'd been to the moon before.
One of only 3 people to make the trip twice, actually. He flew on Gemini, and crucially on Apollo 10, that was the dress rehearsal mission.
Ah, so they flew the lander right down close to the surface but didn't actually land.
Exactly. He knew the neighborhood. Then there was Ronald Evans, the command module pilot.
His story's interesting. Came in late, pulled from combat duty in Vietnam.
Yeah. Apollo 17 was his first and only space flight. His job was vital orbiting the moon while the others were down below.
And the third crew member. This was a big change, wasn't it? Harrison Schmitt.
Huge. Originally, it was going to be Joe Engle, a test pilot. But when Apollo 18 was canceled, the science community really lobbied hard.
They wanted a scientist on the moon for the last mission.
And they got one. Harrison Jack Schmitt, a geologist. The first and still the only scientist to walk on the moon.
And the sources say he was totally focused on the geology aspect. He really changed how they trained for lunar science.
There's that great story about him during training.
Yeah.
Looking at a rock sample through a magnifying glass.
Oh, yeah. He asks the others, do you know what a geologist does when he finds a rock?
And when they don't know, he holds the glass up again and says something like, have you ever tried doing this in a spacesuit?
Huh. Perfectly captures his mindset. He was there to do fieldwork, serious science, under extreme conditions.
Absolutely. So that's the crew. Ready to go. Launch date, December 7, 1972, just after midnight.
12:33 a.m. And this was special for the Saturn V rocket.
The Beast. Largest rocket ever.
And Apollo 17 was the only time they launched it at night.
Must have been incredible. The sources say it turned night into day. You could see it for 500 miles. A dramatic visual finale for the program.
What about inside? Cernan described the launch.
Intense vibration, right. Low frequency, really heavy.
Yeah, he said for a few moments he literally couldn't read the gauges in front of him because everything was shaking so hard.
Wow. Feeling that raw power. Okay, so they lift off, do a couple of Earth orbits.
Standard procedure, check everything out. Then they fired up the third stage again, the SIVB.
And off they go towards the moon, 25,000 miles per hour.
And on that trip out, about 45,000 kilometers away from Earth, they took the photo.
The blue marble still takes your breath away.
It really does. It was the first time anyone had captured a photo of the fully illuminated Earth.
Just seeing it like that. A grand oasis in the vastness of space, as one source puts it. So small, so isolated.
You can see why people argue it kickstarted the environmental movement, or at least gave it a huge boost.
Yeah, that makes all the conflicts down here seem, well, stupid is the word used. We're all on this big spaceship together.
And it's kind of funny. We still don't know for sure which crew member actually took that specific shot.
An anonymous masterpiece. Okay, so they journey on, arrive at the moon.
And entering lunar orbit, that was another symbolic step, wasn't it? The first time humans really committed to another world's gravity.
Breaking the bond with Earth, in a way. A step towards maybe living elsewhere.
Potentially. Once they were in orbit, the mission split. Ron Evans stayed up in the command module, the America.
Doing his orbital science, mapping, using cameras, laser altimeters, collecting data we still use.
While Cernan and Schmitt climbed into the lunar module, the Challenger, and headed down
to the Taurus Littrow Valley, chosen specifically because it was geologically fascinating.
Right. A mix of old highlands and younger volcanic stuff near a huge impact basin, a geologist's dream site.
But also the most dangerous landing site they'd attempted.
Yeah, higher risk, but the scientific payoff was judged to be worth it. The chance to sample really diverse materials.
And they absolutely made the most of it down there. 3 days on the surface. This is where Apollo 17 really earns that hidden jewel title. It was all about the records.
Okay, let's list some. Longest stay on the moon.
Yep, just over 3 days, 3 moonwalks, EVAs, each nearly 8 hours long, pushing human limits.
And they drove further than anyone else, right, in the lunar rover.
Covered about 34 kilometers, over 21 miles in total. That rover was key.
An incredible vehicle, weighed maybe 450 pounds on Earth, but peanuts in lunar gravity. Cruised at 6 to 7 miles per hour.
Though Cernan admitted pushing it to maybe 11 miles per hour downhill once. Got a bit bumpy.
Need for speed, even on the moon. And they deployed the biggest science package, too, the ALSEP.
Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package, 4 brand new experiments for 17.
Right, measuring the thin lunar atmosphere with a mass spectrometer, looking for tiny moonquakes with a gravimeter.
Checking for meteorite impacts and doing seismic tests with explosives.
Yeah, setting off small charges remotely to map the subsurface layers, really trying to understand the moon's structure and activity.
It shows how focused on science this mission was right to the end. But things didn't go perfectly smoothly. The fender.
Ah, yes, the fender bender. A classic Apollo moment. Early on, Cernan's working near the rover.
Brushes against it, and the hammer tucked in his suit pocket catches the rear fender. Rips a piece right off.
Sounds minor, but on the moon, dust is the enemy. Fine, abrasive, gets everywhere.
And without that fender, the rover's wheel kicked up this huge plume of dust. A rooster tail.
Coating everything, including, critically, the rover's batteries.
Which were dark-colored. And in direct sunlight, dark things absorb heat. The dust was like an insulating blanket.
Exactly. If those batteries overheated, the rover was done for. That would have crippled the mission's science goals for the next 2 EVAs.
Could have been mission over, essentially, for the surface exploration. So they needed a fix. Fast.
Cernan pulls out the universal tool, duct tape.
Can you imagine trying to peel and stick duct tape wearing those bulky, pressurized gloves?
Must have been incredibly fiddly, but they managed it. Taped the broken piece back on.
And it held for a bit, about 4 hours.
Yeah, long enough to get some work done. But then they hit rough ground and pop, it came off again. Dust everywhere.
So back in Houston, alarm bells are ringing. They have to find a better fix before the next day's EVA.
Right. Engineers are scrambling. John Young, the Apollo 16 commander, was actually in a spacesuit doing practice runs.
And he helped brainstorm using materials they knew the crew had available.
Yeah, they came up with this ingenious, low-tech solution. Use a laminated geology map, stiff but bendable.
And clamp it onto the fender frame using small clamps they had for equipment.
They radioed the instructions up. Cernan and Schmitt built this makeshift fender out of a map and some clamps.
And it worked. Held perfectly for the rest of the mission, another 15 hours of driving.
It's why the source says Apollo 17's true science potential was saved by duct tape. Or, well, duct tape and a map.
Brilliant problem solving under pressure. Okay, rover fixed, they could really get down to the science, and they found some amazing things.
Top of the list has to be the orange soil at Shorty Crater.
They drove quite a way to get there, right? Saw this dark halo around the crater.
Yeah, about 7 kilometers. Schmitt gets out, kicks at the soil, and suddenly, bright orange.
The descriptions from Mission Control, geologists almost shaking with excitement.
Because finding color like that on the generally gray moon was a huge sign. It looked like proof of recent volcanic activity, which they were hoping to find.
So what was it when they got it back to Earth?
Tiny beads of volcanic glass, formed in a massive fire fountain eruption about 3.6 billion years ago.
Wow. So molten rock spraying up, cooling instantly into glass pieces.
Exactly. And what's still really interesting is the evidence suggesting water might have played a role in driving that eruption, which is significant for the moon's history. Those samples are still crucial today.
Incredible find. They also looked at those big boulders, didn't they? Ones that roll down the mountains.
Yes, the massif surrounding the valley. By studying where they came from and what they were made of, they could learn about the ancient lunar crust and huge impact events from billions of years ago.
Which tells us about Earth's early history, too, since they formed together.
Precisely. Now, while all this was happening on the surface, Ron Evans was working hard upstairs.
Right, flying solo in the command module, doing all that orbital mapping and remote sensing.
His data was invaluable, creating detailed maps, especially of areas they couldn't visit. Still fundamental for lunar science.
And the sources also give us these little human touches, like Evans apparently making hydrogen bubbles in his drinking water just to watch them.
Little things to pass the time, maybe, but also the really poignant stuff, like Eugene Cernan and his daughter's initials.
Oh yeah, Tracy. He promised her he'd leave something on the moon for her.
And just before climbing back into the LM for the last time, knowing he'd be the last person there for, who knew how long, he knelt down.
And traced her initials, PDC, in the dust with his finger.
Knowing they'd sit there undisturbed for potentially millions of years. Such a powerful personal act.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
So they wrap up on the surface. Record-breaking work. 22 hours of EVA time, 110 kilos, that's nearly 250 pounds of rocks and soil, 2,400 photos taken.
And right at the end, Jack Schmitt had one slightly odd request.
He wanted to throw his geology hammer.
Apparently, maybe a geologist thing, maybe just a Schmitt thing. Cernan let him. They also rolled some rocks down a slope, which is more standard geology practice.
And then Cernan had to deliver the final words from the lunar surface. No pressure.
Yeah. Summing up the entire Apollo experience, knowing he was closing that chapter, he spoke from the heart, looking out at the landscape one last time.
Meanwhile, back in Houston, one last technical challenge. Filming liftoff.
Right. Ed Fendel, the controller in charge of the remote TV camera left on the surface, they hadn't managed to capture the ascent before.
And there was that 6-second time delay for the signal. He had to anticipate the movement.
Exactly. Tilting the camera just right based on prediction. And the sources say he nailed it. A truly spectacular shot of the Challenger lifting off.
So they blast off, meet up with Ron Evans in orbit.
Rendezvous and dock. Transfer all those precious samples, the film canisters.
And they spent 3 more days in lunar orbit doing science.
Yeah, continuing the mapping and observations. They were the last humans to see the Earth rise over the moon's horizon.
Cernan's words as they finally left lunar orbit. God willing, as we shall return. A hope for the future.
And even on the way home, there was work to do. Ron Evans did a spacewalk.
To retrieve film cassettes from the outside of the service module.
Yep. Then the final plunge back to Earth. Fiery reentry, peaking at 7 Gs briefly as the atmosphere slowed them down.
And splashdown. Safe and sound in the Pacific.
So you look back at Apollo 17, sometimes it gets overshadowed because it was the last. Maybe the public wasn't paying as much attention.
But calling it lackluster is just wrong. It was the opposite.
Absolutely. It was a powerhouse. Record-breaking duration, distance, science payload. Its scientific legacy is immense.
It fundamentally changed how we saw the moon. Not just a dead rock, but a complex world with a dynamic history.
And the data, the samples. Scientists are still making discoveries from what Apollo 17 brought back decades later. It gave us, as the sources say, a first-order understanding of another planet.
That's huge. It represents new knowledge about our own planet's past, hints at resources, maybe even a pathway to settling space.
And yet, that drive, that impetus to get out there, it faded after 1972. We haven't been back that far since.
None of them thought they'd still be the last ones decades later.
No, and many experts now argue that going back to the moon is the essential next step for deep space exploration for Mars.
The sources are clear. We have the technology, basically. It's about political will and funding.
Ultimately, Apollo, with 17 as its scientific peak, gave us this incredible new perspective. On the moon, yes, but also on Earth, that fragile blue marble.
Our place in the universe. It inspired people, showed what we could do when we aimed high, tackled things because they are hard.
It really did put a very satisfactory line under the whole thing, scientifically speaking. The most productive mission capping off the program. Still maybe a hidden jewel to many, though.
So, yeah, Apollo 17, not just an ending, but a culmination, packed with science, ingenuity that fender fix, profound human moments, and discoveries that continue to resonate.
It wasn't just closing a chapter, it was arguably the high point of that chapter's exploration and science, leaving us looking at our world and ourselves differently.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Given everything Apollo 17 achieved, the science, the perspective shift from seeing that blue marble, why do you think it's still often called a hidden jewel? And maybe more profoundly, what does the fact that we haven't ventured that far again since 1972 suggest about our priorities, or maybe our nerve? What are we potentially missing by not heading back out there?